Warm and sunny day. Green grass, a little patchy. Three kids playing in an open paddock telling stories about how they can outrun the bull over the fence. Dad's nearby. He relaxes, leaning on his shovel for a moment. Shoveling manure isn't so bad when you can enjoy sunshine and your children's laughter. John the father thought, however, it might be best if the kids avoided heat stroke. John was a kind, brilliant father. He was always thinking ahead. John walked over to a nearby tree, calling his horse. He then unpacked a blanket to sit on and a couple of water flasks. Kids saw something coming out of the saddlebags. They instinctively pranced towards the promise of goodies. Lindsay, the oldest at 8, running ahead of the others, started to chant, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." The younger siblings getting into the rhythm. "Lindsay, Ruby, Josh, who's my favourite kid?" John asked expectantly. The kids diligently responded, "Me, me, me." Lindsay and Josh gulped on the cool water. "You all are," came John's warm, constant response. John picked up his shovel again. Time for more work. John took 3 steps as the kids started yammering happily. An odd shaking of leaves made him glance back up into the tree. Ruby had a big gulp of water as Lindsay asked Josh if he had seen an eagle before. Ruby pulled the flask away from her mouth to catch a breath of air as she looked up to a rustle of leaves. Grey, calloused bark filled Ruby's vision. All Ruby could think as a fragile 8-year-old little girl was "Daddy" as her head crumpled, a heavy branch opening her up from the pretty part in her hair to a cute button nose socket. A burst of brain matter and dust filled the air and lungs of Ruby's family. John the good father's booming cracked "No!" paled the world as though the force of his will would rewrite it as God's own. 2 shrieking children frozen, not wanting to touch the bloodied broken body of their beloved sister, unsure if they should stay or run. Father screaming, hugging Ruby's warm body, not yet willing to move the branch for fear of how much worse his darling would look underneath. John's punishing brain already forming the prognosis that he did this to Ruby. He knew he had put his daughter at ease under a widowmaker. John's hand slipped to his wrist as he sobbed. Maybe he should rip his veins from his arm to guide his daughter on her journey, as he could never atone in life. John punctured his left arm with his fingernails, his skin breaking, pressure pushing away the blood. His fingers were digging through the rubbery flesh of his wrist as he realized his other children would need him to get home. John took a mental step back, shutting the door on the deaf, putting it into mind's shadow. He calmly removed a knife from his pocket, walked over to where his remaining children had run out of sounds, pushed them gently in the direction of his horse. The father then proceeded to cut a path in the tree bark, cutting off any future nutrients the tree would receive. It was time to take the kids back to Mum before picking up the pieces of ended hope. 10 years and I'll come help you, my sweet, was all John thought as he led his children away on his horse. Sia, Ruby's mother, didn't say anything as John broke news, though her eyes were never again dry. Sia's temper would never again rise as the vibrant mother was taken away. For now only Sia's outer shell would stand. It would take care of the children. Warm Sia was in an ice torture, imagining how her daughter felt, what she went through, imagining where she was. John returned to the site. He returned alone as it was his daughter, not a burden nor a responsibility. It wasn't right if other people saw her like this. It wasn't how she was. Time passed. Josh and Lindsay started laughing again, playing again. Children are designed to be resilient. Most of them. After 3 months, John the gaunt father sat in a small cemetery. The air was quiet, the smell of death radiant. A fingernail moon trailed the sky. Josh, John's young boy, had fallen asleep against John. Josh had just turned 7, and although it had been months since the passing of his little sister, he hadn't been to her grave before. Josh was too afraid to attend the funeral, too afraid to come to the cemetery before. He had been distancing himself from every memory that he'd had of his little sister. This was the only defense he'd had. Since turning 7, though, Josh had taken it upon himself to be a big boy. Big boys do right by their little sisters. John didn't mind the company. It was like a candle flame, the warmth of his son burning like a candle in his darkness, softly comforting him. John began telling Ruby's grave about what a good big brother Josh was becoming, how strong and brave he was, how even though bad things had happened, even though Ruby wasn't there to look after her big brother, though she did it by dobbing him in to Mummy and Daddy when he was in trouble, He was going to overcome everything. Josh would be successful. So successful, John said, his eyes hollow, still, but his mouth smiling. Ruby deserved smiles, John had told himself since the incident. John's arm was getting wet with Josh's drool as he slept. The gaunt father looked down, moving to wipe the drool from his arm. Two big eyes stared up at him, his son's head tilted up at him at an odd angle, his throat gaping open like the mouth to a black-red hell. John shrieked, moving away from his son, fear shooting through him, though he gentled his son's fall as he stood. A large abomination of a woman was 3 graves away. Her hair was long, her body deformed, with fingernails perfect for shredding flesh. As John stared at the hag, it stared back at him, seemingly expecting more from him. The naked leathery woman hissed. A snake seemingly protruded from its mouth where a tongue should be, and it lashed out at John. John didn't bother dodging. The hag missed. This struck the man as all too ironic. He picked up his son, whose stare went forever, and once again returned home. The fire was hot coals at home. Sia the faithful was asleep. Lindsay the gorgeous had crept into Mum and Dad's bed to keep away the bad dreams. John the certain put his lifeless son carefully into bed, gave him a kiss, said I love you to his wife and daughter. He picked up some flint from the stove and a canister of oil from the shed. The stars had disappeared behind the clouds. John was not quiet as he entered the cemetery, although he didn't need to be quiet, as it would be hard to hear him over the loud slurping sound coming from further in. It must be a grave hag, thought the certain father. John poured the lamp oil over his head. It made the air so thick he found it hard to breathe. His eyes burned and his soul welcomed the warmth. He walked towards the sound of breaking bones. John stopped as the creature came into sight, though it wasn't the creature that stopped him. It was eating Ruby. It was eating her head like one would eat a chocolate Easter egg. John's heart stopped. His body calmly walked around behind the hag. Hands struck together flint once. All the ignition that was needed. The grave hag looked up at the noise of the flint. As it made to turn, it saw the fire of hell in the corner of its eye, as the good father allowed the devil the chance to reclaim its lost monster by locking himself onto the hag's back. This time John's smile reached his hollow eyes. I'm coming, sweetie, he said. Sia, upon discovering Josh in his bed the next morning, took Lindsay immediately to a neighbouring village, where she gave her to her cousins to look after. Sia then returned to her house, kissed her sweet boy, and hung herself. Lindsay was forever shunned for her murderous family. The end.